Trump October Surprise, War with China Only Way to Win Re-Election, by Professor Emeritus Ling-Chi Wang of UC Berkeley. I think Pompeo's speech at the Nixon Library amounts to a declaration of U.S. intention to enter a war with China. Only the U.S. Congress can declare such a war, but a vaguely worded congressional resolution, such as the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution on August 7, 1964, can be used as an authorization. To enable a quick passage of such a resolution, all the Trump administration has to do is to provoke an incident in the South China Sea, the East China Sea or the Taiwan Strait. This can be the October surprise before the November elections. I think Trump is running out of options. It is too late for him to do something about flattening the curve to halt the spread of the pandemic. He could have done it 4 months ago, but he chose to deny its presence. His insistence on reopening of business and now reopening of the schools next month will likely accelerate the spread. What he said and did at the White House press conference on July 23 was too little and too late, even though it was quite an about-face of his position on the pandemic. Besides, he said nothing about the continuing rise in unemployment and the pending expiration of the ban on eviction of rental units and home foreclosures, not to mention the piling up of debts, such credit cards, business loans, auto loans, etc. In other words, an added massive homelessness across the country is very likely if the Congress does nothing soon. Since there is no letting up of the deepening recession thus far and the prospect of it slipping into a depression is looming, the chance of a speedy economic recovery before the election is not likely to happen. Trump's only hope of regaining voters' confidence before the election is all but evaporated. On top of all these negative trends, he also has to contend with a political awakening and protests among the younger and educated voters in all major cities in the wake of the brutal killing of George Floyd and the spontaneous outburst of Black Lives Matter movement across the U.S. Trump has been meeting these protests by his call for law and order and deploying paramilitary forces, uninvited and possibly unconstitutional, to suppress them, using the pretext of protecting federal buildings from vandalism. His iron fist will likely be met with more protests and civil disorder. I am tempted to view what has been happening in politics and in the streets a preview of a civil war after the elections in November. His only option to save his presidency before the November elections, therefore, is to play hardball with China. Mike Pompeo and Christopher Wray have been beating the war drums, escalating his provocations and confrontations with China and inciting anti-China racism across the country and among U.S. allies. The abrupt closing of the Chinese consulate in Houston is among the latest example. I therefore think igniting a war, a limited or all-out, with China in October is not unthinkable because it is absolutely his last and only resort to get people to rally around the flag and save his presidency in the November election. One other last resort before the elections is to declare the state of national emergency to indefinitely postpone the November elections. Given what has been happening in rapid succession, we have no choice but to think about what would happen if Trump loses the election. On this, Trump has a few options. First, he can challenge the outcomes of the elections. That will be the beginning of his dictatorial rule. For example, he could declare the state of national emergency by invalidating the results of the election by using his absolute presidential power, backed by none other than his personal fixer, Attorney General William Barr, the new Michael Cohen. This could happen because he has been talking about fraudulent means by Democrats to prevent him getting re-elected, including voting by mail, if you can believe that. Secondly, he could also declare and impose martial laws nationwide and mobilize the military to maintain law and order, as he has been doing already in Washington, D.C. and Portland, or in threatening cities like Chicago, Seattle, and Oakland with impunity. Incredibly, there has been no serious challenge from Republicans nor Democrats in the U.S. Congress, not even hearings. Even with successful legal challenges in lower courts, it will take a long time to reach the U.S. Supreme Court where he has a guaranteed majority to reward him for another 4 years, as it was done in the Bush-Gore contest in the 2000 presidential election, assuming Justice Ruth B. Ginsburg survives the pancreatic cancer and other ailments. If she dies before the election, he could easily appoint a person like Professor John Yoo, who shares his view of absolute presidential power, and fast-track the confirmation procedures by the Senate before inauguration. Even if Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell loses his Kentucky seat in November, thirdly, Trump can use the period between the November elections and the January inauguration to promulgate executive orders and regulations that will legally solidify his dictatorial regime next year. To pacify the public outcries, he can promise to hold another election on a date he will schedule sometime next year, by which time, he would have installed a new electoral system that will guarantee his victory. All the above scenarios are depressing, to say the least. I do worry a lot about Trump engineering an October surprise to secure his re-election in November. I wish I could perish the thought. A war WTH China will be a global disaster for humanity as we know it.